All right, how's everybody doing today? Hotep. Hey, this is Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. I'm a talk show host, researcher, lecturer, and writer. So it is Thursday, April 18th, 2019. And we are live. Hope everybody's doing well today. And it's a very, very busy day. So I wanted to come on and talk about this story that I saw. This came out early April, and I didn't have a chance to talk about it. There was so much going on. And everybody share this broadcast on your Facebook page. Invite your friends to tune in also. But this deals with the last slave ship called the Clotilda, And you've heard me talk about the Clotilda in some of my broadcasts as well. It was in, the ship came out of Alabama, and this was in 1860. Okay, this is the year before the Civil War started. And for a long time, we thought that Cudjo Lewis was the last known survivor of that slave ship. Okay, Cudjo Lewis. Well, now we find out that there was an African American woman who outlived Cudjo Lewis by 2 years, and she was actually the last known survivor of this slave ship. Okay, and her name was Redoshi. Okay, Redoshi. All right, and let me just adjust the. I'm trying to monitor the broadcast also on the second laptop. Okay, so I want to talk some about the story of Redoshi. We'll talk some about Cudjo Lewis. And she was forced into slavery at the age of 12. Okay, she was kidnapped from West Africa in Dahomey, which is modern day Benin. And we know Cudjo Lewis talks about that story also of being kidnapped. Now, this is 5 years before the Civil War ends and chattel slavery ends with the 13th Amendment, okay? But, you know, this is a tragic story because one thing that we have to understand, and if you've seen some of my broadcasts, you hear me talk about this, one thing we have to understand is that the transatlantic slave trade had been outlawed in the U.S. and in Britain by an act of Congress in the U.S., okay? This goes back to May 2nd, 1807, when the U.S. Congress passed a law to outlaw the importation of Africans as slaves into this country. Okay, that was May 2nd, 1807. It went into effect January 1st, 1808. Okay, so all of those Africans who came into the U.S. from January 1st, 1808 on up until 1860, that was all illegal. Okay, that was all illegal. And if you saw my broadcast I did Sunday night, April 14th, on the African History Network show, as well as Sunday, April 7th, 2019, the African History Network show, I talked about legal arguments for reparations, because most of the arguments that are being floated around for reparations are not legal arguments, okay? They are emotional arguments, or they're arguments that deal with morality. Okay, yes, we are owed reparations, but you have to understand how to make a legal argument for reparations because you're dealing with law. Okay, so a lot of these arguments are not legal arguments. So when we look at, for instance, the Amistad of 1839, the Amistad slave ship of 1839, Joseph St. Q, and we look at the movie that was made about the Amistad, they won their case in court to win their freedom. And when that ship came into the U.S., it was illegal, okay? So we have to understand history. We have to understand law. How's everybody doing? We have Vernon, Clark, Bernadine. Everybody share this broadcast on your Facebook page. Invite your friends to tune in also. African-American business owners, post the name of your business here on the thread of the broadcast. And we'll let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network on the podcast of our radio shows and things like this. Advertise with the African History Network. Email us at customer service at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, customer service at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Okay. All right, so let's look at this. So the New York Times had a big article April 3rd, 2019, dealing with this discovery about Redoshi. And it was a new finding published in the journal Slavery and Abolition. Okay, the journal Slavery and Abolition. Okay, so let's look at this article from the New York Times entitled, She Survived a Slave Ship, the Civil War and the Depression. She survived a slave ship, the Civil War, and the Depression. Her name was Redoshi. Okay, Redoshi, not Redoshi. Redoshi. Her name was Redoshi. Okay. Now, as I said, and the article starts out talking about how it had long been believed that Cudjo Lewis was the last living survivor of the transatlantic slave trade in the United States, and of that last slave ship to come into the U.S. called the Clotilda, okay, in 1860. And now a researcher at Newcastle University in Britain says she has discovered testimony from someone who may have lived even longer, a woman named Redoshi, okay. Now, the new findings published last week in the journal Slavery and Abolition are likely to be subject to scholarly debate because there are few records documenting the lives of the last Africans to be captured and brought to the United States on slave ships. Regardless of Redoshi's precise historical status, the researcher, her name is Hannah Durkin, D-U-R-K-I-N, has pieced together accounts from different sources and census records to carve out the remarkable life of a woman who survived the treacherous Middle Passage voyage at age 12, was sold as a child bride as well, and lived through the Civil War and the Great Depression. Now, according to Dr. Hannah Durkin, Redoshi died in 1937. So this was 2 years after Cudjo Lewis died, who died in 1935, okay? If we just look quickly here at some background information on the Clotilda and on Cudjo Lewis. Now, we know it was in May of 2018 that the book from Zora Neal Hurston came out called Barracoon, the story of the last black cargo. And this was the story about the Clotilda, and she interviewed Cudjo Lewis back in, she died in 1960. She interviewed Cudjo Lewis back in, I think it was the 1930s, okay? And she got a firsthand account of him being kidnapped in West Africa, in Dahomey, which is modern day Benin, being on the slave ship, and being on the plantation, when the Civil War comes, things like this, okay? So we know Zora Neal Hurston dies in 1960. There was a good article also from face-to-faceafrica.com. Face-to-faceafrica.com has a good article as well. Cudjo Lewis, the last U.S. slave ship survivor from Benin, who founded Africa Town. Now, this is from March 24th, 2019. This article is before the discovery was made public about Redoshi, okay? But roughly 60 years after the abolition of slavery, anthropologist Zora Neal Hurston, who was also a writer during the Harlem Renaissance, made an incredible connection. She located the last surviving captive of the last slave ship to bring Africans to the United States. Now, Zora Neal Hurston was known as a figure of the Harlem Renaissance, who later would write the novel Their Eyes Were Watching God, and that was turned into a TV movie starring Halle Berry and Michael Ealy. Now, Zora Neal Hurston conducted interviews with Cudjo Lewis, the survivor, but struggled to publish them as a book in the early 1930s. In fact, they are only now being released to the public in a book called Barracoon, the story of the last black cargo. That book came out May 8, 2018. And one of the reasons why she struggled to get that book published was because when she interviewed Cudjo Lewis, right? You know, so he's a former slave, so he's speaking in what we would call a slave dialect. And she wrote it just as he spoke. And this brought about a lot of backlash from some African Americans who thought it was demeaning to publish that type of speech, etc. Okay, but she insisted that it be published the same way that he spoke. Okay, so Zora Neal Hurston's book tells the story of Cudjo Lewis, who was born in what is now the West African country of Benin. His name was originally Kossula, Kossula, Kossula. He was only 19 years old when members of the neighboring Dahomean tribe captured him and took him to the coastal area there in Dahomey. There, he and about 120 others were sold into slavery and crammed onto the Clotilda slave ship, the last slave ship to reach the continental United States. Okay, now the owner of the slave ship, okay, the white man who owned the slave ship, who lived in Alabama, he basically made a bet that he could successfully bring Africans into the country, even though it was illegal, because you had abolitionists who had slave ships out looking for, abolitionists who had ships out looking for slave ships, okay? And you've had cases where white men were prosecuted and convicted of bringing Africans into the country after it was outlawed. Now white people continue to do it. Don't get me wrong. They continue to do it after January 1st, 1808. Okay, absolutely, they continue to do it. And that law did not prohibit slavery in America, meaning it was still legal to have slaves in America in the states that it had not been abolished. It was illegal to have it was legal to have slave auctions. It was legal to still have slave plantations, etc. What was made illegal was the importation of Africans as slaves into the U.S. And that law went into effect January 1st, 1808. That was because of Article 1, Section 9 of the U.S. Constitution. It's stipulated in the U.S. Constitution. Article 1, Section 9 is stipulated that the importation of Africans coming to this country as slaves would be outlawed. It stipulated a 20-year period of time, a 20-year clause, that the earliest it could be outlawed was in 1808. That was the earliest. That's stipulated by the U.S. Constitution. This is why I tell people, the people who are talking about reparations, right? This is why I tell them the first thing you have to do is read the U.S. Constitution, because that's the foundation of law in this country. And Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution tells you that the U.S. Constitution, all the previous treaties, all the subsequent treaties are the supreme law of the land, okay? So if you don't understand the Constitution, you really don't understand history, and you won't understand how to make a legal argument for reparations, because most of these arguments floating around are not legal arguments. They sound good on YouTube, right? And they look good in a Facebook post, but you actually try to get a bill passed through Congress and get signed into law. Okay, so if you listen to my show I did April 14th, the African History Network show, and April 7th, I break down these legal arguments, and I explain to people, you understand how many white people in the U.S. Senate have to vote on reparations? And there's only 3 people of African descent in the U.S. Senate, and one already said he ain't voting for it. That's Black Tea Party Republican Tim Scott, a senator from South Carolina. So this is why understanding this history is so important. Okay, how's everybody doing? Everybody share this broadcast on your Facebook page. Invite your friends to tune in also. And African American business owners, post the name of the business here in the thread of your broadcast. We'll let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network. Email us at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. Customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. All right, how you doing, Bro Jackson? And somebody else who had Jatit. They kidnapped and brought my great-grandmother here in 1836. They never kept on laws. Right, 1836. Which ship was that in 1836? Okay, we got John Ruffin, Marcelino. Okay, and if you like this type of information, also you can donate to the African History Network as well. PayPal.me/the AHN show. PayPal.me/the AHN show as well. That helps us to keep doing the research, pay for getting stuff printed up, pay for the ink cartridges, paper, keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting our Sunday night show also. Okay, we'll post a link here as well. PayPal.me/the AHN show. All right, let's see here if we can copy this. All right, let's continue here. So this is a very, very important story, and it ties into a lot what's going on right now, the popularity of H.R. 40, House Resolution number 40, dealing with forming a committee to investigate slavery and the impact slavery had on African Americans, etc. You have some Democratic presidential nominees who said they support H.R. 40. Okay, but we have to understand the law and understand the history behind this. Okay, so let's continue here. Let's go back to this article here. This one is from, the first one's from history.com. The last slave ship survivor gave an interview in the 1930s. It just surfaced. Okay, this is from history.com. This is from, this would be from May 3rd, 2018. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so so Cudjo Lewis and about 120 others were sold into slavery and crammed onto the Clotilda slave ship. Now, the Clotilda brought its captives to Alabama in 1860, just a year before the Civil War started. Even though slavery was legal at the time in the U.S., the international slave trade was not, and had not been for over 50 years. Along with many European nations, the U.S. had outlawed the practice in 1807. That was March 2nd, 1807, when Congress passed that law. It didn't go into effect until January 1st, 1808. And like I said, the earliest it could go into effect was January 1st, 1808, which was stipulated by the U.S. Constitution. Article 1, Section 9 of the U.S. Constitution. To read the U.S. Constitution, you can go to loc.gov, which is the Library of Congress website, loc.gov, and just search for the U.S. Constitution. Or you can go to archives.gov, the National Archives, archives.gov also, okay? All right, so now Cudjo Lewis' journey was an example of how slave traders went around the law to continue bringing over human cargo. Okay, now to avoid detection, Cudjo Lewis' captors snuck him and the other survivors into Alabama at night and made them hide in a swamp for several days. Okay, to hide the evidence of their crime, the 86-foot sailboat was then set on fire on the banks of the Mobile Tensaw Delta. Its remains may have been uncovered in January 2018. So January 2018, there were stories saying that they believe they had recovered the remains of the Clotilda. Okay, I got to go back and read those articles to see what the verdict was. All right, so now Cudjo, the interview that Zora Neal Hurston did with Cudjo Lewis was a firsthand account of the disorienting trauma of slavery. Now, after being abducted from his home, Cudjo Lewis was forced onto a slave ship with strangers. The abductees spent several months together during the treacherous passage to the United States, but were then separated in Alabama to go to different plantations. Cudjo Lewis told Zora Neal Hurston, quote, "We were very sorry to be parted from one another. We 70 days crossed the water from the Africa soil." Okay, he said Africa, A-F-F-I-C-A, Africa soil, "and now they part us from one another. Therefore we cry. Our grief so heavy, look like we can't stand it. I think maybe I die in my sleep when I dream about my mama." Okay, now this is a firsthand account. She interviewed him in the 1930s. This was a firsthand account of the transatlantic slave trade, of that voyage from one of the survivors, Cudjo Lewis. Now, Cudjo also describes what it was like to arrive on a slave plantation where no one spoke his language and could explain to him, and no one could explain to him where he was or what was going on. He said, quote, "We done know why we be bring way from our country to work like this. Okay, everybody look at us strange. We want to look. He said we want to talk with other colored folks, but they don't know what we say." Okay, so he's talking about what it is like being on the slave plantation. All right, let's continue here. My browser is freezing up a little bit, so just bear with me. All right, so as for the Civil War, okay, as for the Civil War, Cudjo Lewis said he wasn't aware of the Civil War when it first started. So it starts April 12, 1861 with the attack on Fort Sumter in South Carolina. But partway through, he began to hear that the North had started a war to free enslaved people like him. Okay, now that's not why the Civil War was started. The Civil War was started to bring the South back into the Union. The Civil War was not started to free enslaved Africans. That was an ultimate result of the Civil War. But it was started to bring the South back into the Union. And even March 4th, 1861, when Abraham Lincoln gives his inaugural address, because he was elected president-elect November 6, 1860. December 20th, 1860, South Carolina becomes the first state to secede from the Union. They fear that Lincoln is going to free the slaves, okay? March 4th, 1861, at his inaugural address, he reassured the remaining southern states that he had no intention of ending slavery in states where slavery still continued. Now, this infuriated abolitionists, African-American and white abolitionists, especially Frederick Douglass, okay, because the Republican Party was organized by groups of abolitionists. The Republican Party was formed by groups of abolitionists in 1854 to be the counter of the Democratic Party, okay? But we know when we study history, we know that those obstructionist Democrats, those Southern Democrats known as Dixiecrats, now all of the, when we go into the 50s and 60s, things like this, all of the Democrats were not obstructionist segregationists. These are largely those Southern Democrats called Dixiecrats. And these are the ones that Malcolm X talked about a lot. Because of the Civil Rights Act of 64 and the Voting Rights Act of 65, they're largely going to leave the Democratic Party and they go to the Republican Party, where they still are today. You have a flip in a large constituency of the party, and a lot of those in Congress. They're going to flip those obstructionist Democrats, those that largely led a 75-day filibuster to the Civil Rights Act in 1964. Most of them are going to leave the Democratic Party and go to the Republican Party. So this is what people like Candace Owens, who wants to talk about Democrats, she doesn't understand history, okay? And by 1960, 2/3 of African Americans had already switched over to the Democratic Party. That goes back to 1928, when Herbert Hoover was the Republican candidate for president, and he employed a Southern strategy to bring Southerners and to galvanize support from Southerners, white Southerners, to vote him into office. He ran against a Northern Democrat named Al Smith. And they employed a Southern strategy to appeal to these Southerners because they implemented what was called the Lily White movement. This is where the Lily White movement in the Republican Party starts. And there was a movement to ignore the plight and conditions and concerns of African Americans, to push them out of the Republican Party. This goes back to 1928. So people like Candace Owens don't understand this history. Go watch, I did a video, we dealt with this on my show for almost 2 hours. And it's here on Facebook, and it's on our YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, Imhotep. And I dealt with the history of why African Americans switched from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party. And I went back in history, going back to before 1928, and brought it all the way up to the 1960s, going into 64 when Barry Goldwater runs for president, and then 68 with Richard Nixon. Okay, I dealt with all that history. So go check that out. We may have to rebroadcast that video also, because some people are not familiar with this history. But you have to understand how historical events cause conditions to take place. Policies and laws are put in place to deal with the conditions. Those policies and laws then create side effects, which create other conditions, sometimes intended or unintended. There's a reaction, there's a movement to deal with the side effects of the policies. And then policies are put in place to deal with the movements that came about because of side effects of laws and policies that were put into place. So we have to understand this cycle also, okay? All right, I'm trying to look at some of the comments. How's everybody doing? Okay, so African-American business owners post the name of your business here on the thread of the broadcast also, and we'll let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network as well. Email us at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com, customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. We have Juanita, Angie, David, Ray, just a few of the people watching us, and Brother Abdul, Brother Kawezi, Brother Abdul in Detroit. Share this broadcast on your Facebook page. Invite your friends to tune in also, okay? All right, let's continue here. And let me turn down the volume here. I'm trying to monitor comments. Okay, Juanita, okay, is in Houston. Marcelino, I have went back and forth with a Trump supporter about Candace Owens. Okay, Marcelino, so what you do, go to news1.com and read the article from news1.com. I talked about it briefly on my show Sunday night. And at the end of the broadcast, I'll post some links about little Candace Owens, who's afraid to debate Roland Martin. She got her clock cleaned by Dr. Michael Eric Dyson on Ari Melber's show, The Beat on MSNBC. Okay, she's an idiot. And just in 2016, she was running a website. She was basically running a website that attacked Donald Trump. It was basically an anti-Donald Trump website. Now she's the darling of millennial Republicans who want a black face on their movement. Okay, and they're using her and she's using them because they don't apparently. I mean, they're dumber than they look. I guess that's what it boils down to. But this article dealt with 5 lies that Candace Owens told. I think I have it right here. 5 times Candace Owens lied to Congress while testifying about white nationalism. This is from April 9, 2019. So y'all should read this article here, okay? 5 times Candace Owens lied to Congress while testifying about white nationalism. And one of the things she lied about was a Southern strategy. A Southern strategy happened back in 1928. Southern strategy happened also with Richard Nixon in 1968. A Southern strategy was also used by Bill Clinton and the Democrats with the 1994 omnibus crime bill as well, that he signed into law September 13th, 1994. Now, contrary to popular belief, contrary to the book, The New Jim Crow, contrary to, the documentary 13th and all this stuff, the 94 crime bill did not start mass incarceration. If you want to deal with the beginning of mass incarceration, you have to go back, not to the 13th Amendment, because that whole thing with the convict leasing system was horrible. But it was the sharecropping system on the plantations that did more damage to African Americans than the convict leasing system. There was exponentially more African Americans involved in the sharecropping system than the convict leasing system. So it wasn't the convict leasing system, even though it was horrible. 1865, and the last state to outlaw was Alabama, 1928. The sharecropping system did more damage to us than the convict leasing system. Okay, but read this article, news1.com, and she talked about the Southern strategy being a myth. Okay, That's a lie. She doesn't understand. She doesn't understand history, and they call her out on this. And they said, of course, the Southern strategy is a very real thing that has been documented millions of times over and over and was described by History.com as, quote, the Republican Party's successful plan of getting the white Southern population to shift their views from Democratic to Republican, end quote. History.com is the official website of the History Channel. Okay, read this article about Candace Owens and how she sat up there and just blatantly lied. And the Republicans on the committee, this was the House Judiciary. It was the House Judiciary Committee. The Republicans on the committee wanted to undermine Democrats calling out white supremacy and white nationalism and the rise of this because it points directly at Trump. They wanted to undermine this, so it was the Republicans on that committee that invited Candace Owens to testify to offset, to try to discredit what the Democrats were stating was taking place. Because the Democrats are correct. When you go look at, and then we'll jump back on dealing with Cudjo Lewis in just a second here. But when you look at articles, New York Times, February 20th, 2019, over 1,000 hate groups are now active in United States, civil rights group says. Over 1,000 hate groups are now active in United States, civil rights group says. You check that out. They talk about the rise in the hate groups, 30% increase in the number of hate crimes reported to the FBI from 2015 to 2017, and the surge of right-wing violence that the Anti-Defamation League said had killed at least 50 people in 2018, okay? And then you look at November 20th, 2018, we look at the article from NBCnews.com. In every tally of hate crimes, Blacks are the most frequent victims. In every tally of hate crimes, Blacks are the most frequent victims. That's NBCnews.com, November 21st, 2018, okay? So check out those articles. We'll post those links when we get done. Okay, those are just some of the things. See all this paper? This is all paper, this, you know. This okay, so let's continue here. And you can donate to the African History Network, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show, okay? That's just some of the research that I do, and you hear me talk about these topics on our radio show, the African History Network show. And you can listen to the podcast, go to AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. You can listen to the podcast there as well, but this is just a sample, just of some of the articles here on my desk. This is just a sample. Okay, this doesn't include the file folders over here on the side. That's just a sample, okay? All right, let's see who we have here. Marcelino, nothing personally against the sister. Well, she's an idiot. Juanita, miseducated is not the word for her. She is true epitome of a sellout. Yeah, she's an idiot. She's miseducated, and then she brought her grandfather there as a prop and said he's a sharecropper. He was in the South Alabama, somewhere like that. He was a sharecropper, and then she wanted to say, oh, racism today is not as bad as it was when her grandfather, you know, when her grandfather was younger, things like that. Oh, we're not saying that racism today was as bad as it was in the 1920s and 1930s or 40s. What we're saying is that we have seen an increase in hate crimes. We've seen an increase in number of hate groups. And we're saying that we've seen an increase in this climate since Trump has been president. That's what we're talking about. Okay. All right, let's continue here. And the computer's freezing up a little bit, the screen. So let's continue. All right. So the Civil War starts 1861, and Cudjo Lewis said that he was not aware of the Civil War when it started, but partway through he began to hear that the North had started a war to free enslaved people like him. Okay, now once again, Civil War was started to bring the South back into the Union. Okay, the South seceded from the Union, set up Confederate States of America. Lincoln said if he could keep the Union together and maintain slavery, he would do that. Okay, this is what we have to understand. Lincoln was not an abolitionist, contrary to popular belief. Lincoln was not an abolitionist, contrary to, he thought that slavery was morally wrong, but he was confused about what to do about it. He was not an abolitionist. Now, a few days after Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered in April of 1865, Cudjo Lewis says that a group of Union soldiers stopped by a boat on which he and other enslaved African people were working and told them they were free. Okay. Now, Cudjo Lewis expected to receive compensation for being kidnapped and forced into slavery, and was angry to discover that emancipation did not come with the promise of quote unquote 40 acres and a mule or any kind of reparations. Now, keep in mind, 40 acres and a mule, Special Field Order number 15, as I talked about a few days ago, that did not apply to all African Americans. That did not apply to all former slaves, okay? It did not apply to all the land in the South. It only applied to coastal land in South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, all right? And then most of that land that was given away, 400,000 acres of land, was allocated to 40,000 former slaves. And it's going to be President Andrew Johnson who gives a pardon to the Confederacy because they committed a treasonous act. And most of that land he's going to return back to the former plantation owners, slave owners, etc. Okay, so now frustrated by the refusal of the government to provide him with land to live on after stealing him away from his homeland in Dahomey, Cudjo Lewis and a group of 31 other former slaves, free African people, saved up money to buy land near the state capital of Mobile, Alabama, which they called Africatown, okay, Africatown. Now, Zora Neal Hurston's use of vernacular dialogue in both her novels and her anthropological interviews was often controversial, as some African-American thinkers at the time argued that this played to Black caricatures in the minds of white people. They felt it was demeaning to African Americans who were trying to be upwardly mobile and going to college, etc. Okay, and so many of them were against her using this type of vernacular in her interviews. Now, Zora Neal Hurston disagreed and refused to change Cudjo Lewis dialect, which was one of the reasons a publisher turned her manuscript down in the 1930s. So this manuscript was not published until May 8th, 2018. So many decades later, her principled stance means that modern readers will get to hear Cudjo Lewis' story the way he told it. All right, so that is from history.com. That's an article. There were a number of articles written about this at the time. History.com, this is the official website of the History Channel, May 3rd, 2018. The last slave ship survivor gave an interview in the 1930s. It just surfaced. All right, so now if we go and we look at the article from, we'll go back to the article from New York Times, and this is dealing with Redoshi, who is discovered, she died after Cudjo Lewis, so she was actually the last survivor, okay? And she died in 1937. Cudjo Lewis died in 1935. Now, this discovery was published in the journal Slavery and Abolition, early April 2019. And let's see, Dr. Hannah Durkin, okay, was the one who made this discovery. And let's see here. Dr. Hannah Durkin pieced together accounts from different sources and census records to carve out the remarkable life of a woman who survived the treacherous Middle Passage voyage at the age of 12, was sold as a child bride, and lived through the Civil War and the Great Depression, okay? So according to Dr. Hannah Durkin, Redoshi died in 1937. She said it was thought that this woman was lost to history. Now, Dr. Durkin is a lecturer at Newcastle University. But Redoshi was not lost. She is believed to have been taken from a West African village before being brought to the United States in 1860 on the Clotilda slave ship, the same slave ship that Cudjo Lewis was on. And this was the last recorded slave ship to arrive in the country after more than 246 years of slavery. It's actually 246 years. Now, the rest of her life provides a stark example of the physical and psychological trauma left on those who survived the transatlantic slave trade. Scars that continue to inflame tensions in the United States today. And see, this is why, if you go watch my show, watch the videos on my show, and they're on our YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, and here on Facebook, the African History Network, I talk about how if we're ever going to get reparations, America has to have a massive history lesson. Americans are woefully ignorant when it comes to history, okay? And if we're ever going to get reparations, America must have a massive history lesson to properly deal with the history of slavery. This is why this study is so important from the Southern Poverty Law Center. It's called Teaching Hard History, American Slavery. Teaching Hard History, American Slavery. So if you are a school teacher, if you do homeschooling, this is a study you can download from splcenter.org, Southern Poverty Law Center, splcenter.org. Just search for Teaching Hard History, American Slavery. We'll post the link here as well. And this is a 52-page study that documents how the history of slavery in our schools, in schools across the country, not just African-American schools, in schools across the country is being incorrectly taught. And it deals with the long-ranging implications from that. And it also deals with how to more correctly teach the history of slavery. And one of the things that it does is it tells teachers, do not do slavery enactments. Do not do slavery enactments. That's psychologically damaging to the children, especially African-American children, okay? All right. And then you can all email us at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com, African-American business owners. Email us at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com, and we'll let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network also. All right, let's continue here. Let me just copy this here. This is other computers freezing up on me. And they did a survey, just to give you a quick example of how ignorant Americans are of history. They did a survey of 1,000 12th graders. Now, 12th graders are studying more history than the average adult is. Only 8% of 12th graders surveyed, out of 1,000, only 8% of 12th graders surveyed knew that that slavery was the central reason why the Civil War was fought. Only 8%. Okay. So what does that mean? That means that parents didn't teach them any better also. That's what that means. That means that parents didn't teach them any better as well. Probably because their parents didn't know any better. All right, so the rest of Redoshi's life provides a stark example of the physical and psychological trauma left on those who survived the transatlantic slave trade, scars that continue to inflame tensions in the United States today. The whole debate over the Confederate monuments and whether Confederate monuments should be taken down or left up comes from a lack of understanding of this history. Those monuments were largely erected to terrorize African Americans and to keep us in a low subservient position in society. It was not, they were not erected largely to teach history or to honor the Confederacy and things like, no, that's not why they were erected. Southern Poverty Law Center has a study that deals with, it shows you when most of these monuments were erected. Most of them were erected not after the Civil War ended in 1865, but from 1895 to 1915 is when you have the largest amount erected. 1895, that's the year before Plessy versus Ferguson, Supreme Court case, which legalizes separate and unequal, the Jim Crow laws. This is after you have a reversal of the Civil Rights Acts, like the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and Civil Rights Act of 1865. Okay, after you have reversals, basically reversals of those, and you have a rise in terrorism against African Americans as well. 1915 is the year the Birth of a Nation movie comes out, February 8th, 1915. And then the second period of time when you have the most number of Confederate monuments erected is 1955 to 1970. Okay, 1955, right after Brown versus Board of Education, U.S. Supreme Court case, May of 1954, which struck down Plessy versus Ferguson, okay, desegregated schools. You have these monuments erected in opposition to school desegregation. And then you have more erected as we get further into the civil rights movement as well. You're also going to have, right after Brown versus Board of Education, you're going to have a rise in the usage of school vouchers that are being used. They're being given to poor white families so they can go to white private schools, and they can keep these white private schools all white and lock out African Americans. Okay, so after Brown versus Board of Education, you're going to see a rise in private schools. You'll see a rise in school vouchers being used because they're trying to keep the schools segregated. They're trying to circumvent the Supreme Court, keep the schools segregated with the usage of private schools and school vouchers. But also, you'll see you're going to have a large amount of schools renamed after Confederate heroes and Confederate generals, in opposition to school desegregation as well. This is going to take place after Brown versus Board of Education. Okay, so now Dr. Durkin wove together bits and pieces of Redoshi's life that were found in Zora Neal Hurston's unpublished writings and an interview that Redoshi gave to the Montgomery Advertiser, which was a newspaper in Montgomery, Alabama, as well as in Bridge Across Jordan, the book Bridge Across Jordan, which was a memoir by the civil rights leader Amelia Boynton Robinson. And Amelia Boynton was instrumental in the fight, in the voting rights fight in Alabama, Selma, Alabama, the march from Selma to Montgomery, all of this. Amelia Boynton was instrumental in that. Now, Redoshi was also filmed for an instructional film released in 1938 by the Department of Agriculture called The Negro Farmer, Extension Work for Better Farming and Better Living. The Negro Farmer, Extension Work for Better Farming and Better Living, possibly making her the only female Clotilda survivor who appeared on film. Now, we know that Cudjo Lewis is on film. And up until this discovery about Redoshi, it was believed that Cudjo Lewis was the only African slave to be captured on film. Okay. But now we know Redoshi was also captured on film as well. Now, the film, which was meant to showcase issues facing formerly enslaved people as they tried to become farmers, shows Redoshi as an old woman on the porch of her small home made out of wooden planks on a plantation in Alabama. As a narrator speaks, she can be seen talking to someone as she sits in a chair wrapped by a quilt. Her white hair looks fuzzy, marked by straight braids poking out of it, and her skin is dark and thick, but still vibrant, okay? She has a gap-toothed smile and cheekbones rising up to her eyes. The footage is the only known video of an African woman who survived slavery in the United States, okay? Dr. Hannah Durkin said the footage of Redoshi is the only known footage of an African woman who survived slavery in the United States. All right, and here's a picture of Redoshi also. You can see this here. My screen's freezing up, otherwise I'll do a screen share, but here's a picture of Redoshi. Okay, so Dr. Durkin said she learned about Redoshi as she researched Zora Neal Hurston's book, Barracoon, The Last Story of the Last Black Cargo, okay? And Dr. Durkin noticed a woman named Sally Smith in the appendix to a posthumously published manuscript by Zora Neal Hurston called Every Tongue Got to Confess. So Redoshi was renamed Sarah Smith. Dr. Durkin says Redoshi was taken from her village in West Africa, where she described her life as peaceful before her father was killed by men who kidnapped her. The interview Redoshi gave to the Montgomery Advertiser newspaper in 1932 indicated that she was from an area of West Africa that is now part of Benin. Dr. Durkin said, I guess she is Yoruba. Okay, I'm not for certain on that, but she said, I guess she's Yoruba. We know the Yoruba are definitely in Nigeria. Maybe they were in Dahomey also. Now, when she arrived in the U.S., she was given the name Sally Smith after she was sold to a man named Washington Smith in Alabama, where she was made a child bride to an enslaved man. So she was sold. She was sold at the age of 12, and she was forced into marriage. History.com has an article about this as well from April 4th, 2019, Forced Marriage as a 12-year-old Girl, the life of America's last slave ship survivor, okay, talking about Redoshi as well. Okay, so let's continue. Now, let's see who we have here. We got John, okay, Zora Neal Hurston, okay, he posted a link to that. Mubay, President Lincoln had an original plan to send all free slaves back to Africa, hence no national plan for reparations. Well, he was before he met with some African American leaders, and at the time, the free African Americans, he was looking at sending them somewhere, whether it's Liberia, whether it's Central America, something like that. He was looking at sending them. That wasn't all of the 4 million Africans enslaved at that time. That was basically the ones that were free. Dr. Henry Louis Gates wrote an article about this for theroot.com that people can check out as well. Something like, did Lincoln want to send free slaves to another country? Something like that. But it's at theroot.com. I'll try to find that article and post a link also. Okay, I didn't, John said, I didn't know that about 40 Acres and a Mule was only for certain states. Yeah, see, go watch the broadcast I did a few days ago dealing with Georgetown University, the students voting to impose a $27.20 fee on undergrad students to go towards a fund to benefit the descendants of the 272 enslaved Africans that the Jesuit priests at Georgetown College sold in 1838 for $115,000 to save Georgetown University. Those proceeds went to financially benefit Georgetown University. And I talked about 40 Acres and a Mule there. That's Special Field Order number 15. Okay, that did not apply to, that only applied to coastal land. Didn't even apply to all of Georgia, only applied to coastal land in Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida. It did not apply to all of the formerly enslaved Africans. This is, once again, this is why I say we have to understand history and law to make legal arguments for reparations. Most of these arguments floating around for reparations are not legal arguments. They sound good in YouTube videos when you have people that don't understand law and history and don't know how to push back on these arguments. Okay, see, because what people have to understand is that the argument that we're owed $14 trillion because we worked for 246 years for free, right, in this country. Well, when you go study the history of slavery, where do you read that slaves were supposed to be paid? When you study the history of slavery in this country, show me the documentation, show me what you're citing. Where did you read that slaves were supposed to be paid? The whole point of enslaving African people was not to pay them. And it was legal. They were not, they were not legally bound to be paid. This is the whole reason why you enslave them for their entire life, to exploit the 262 skills, trades, and crafts that African people had in this country from 1619 to 1865. Read the book, The Other Slaves, by Lewis and Newton, I think it was, 1978. And it details the 262 skills, trades, and crafts that we had in this country from 1619 to 1865. Okay, what evidence are you citing that they were supposed to be paid in the first place, legally paid? Okay, I'm not talking about morally paid. When you deal with law, you ain't dealing with morality. This is the problem. People are trying to deal with morality and say you owe us $14 trillion. You haven't even made a legal argument for it. It was legal not to pay them. It's not like there was a slave union that negotiated wages for the enslaved Africans, and then the slave masters agreed to pay the wages, and then the first of the month came and they refused to pay them for 246 years, and then 154 years after chattel slavery ends, now the descendants of those enslaved Africans are trying to sue for back wages. That ain't what happened. This is why you have to understand law and legal arguments, because none of that are legal arguments. All that was legal. Now, when they kept bringing Africans into this country from January 1st, 1808, up until 1860 with the Clotilda, when they kept doing that, that was illegal. They're violating their own laws. That was federal law. That was illegal. Okay, now that's a legal argument for reparations. It was still legal to have slaves on the plantations, but that's a legal argument. You should read the article that Dr. Jahi Issa and Brother Reggie Marbury wrote back in 2017. I think it was June 2017, called Reparations is Dead. Here's How to Revive It. They wrote it for blackagendareport.com. Okay, read that article, because I interviewed those brothers. I did a two-part interview with them. We did about 4 hours, and they lay out this legal argument, and they lay out legal cases also of where white men were convicted for bringing Africans into this country, violating those federal laws. But we don't understand history. Okay, John, go watch the show I did April 7th, 2019. It's on YouTube. Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP, the African History Network show, and I dealt with Nipsey Hussle, and I dealt with reparations and all that. And I went deep into the legal arguments. I don't have time to get into the legal. I don't have time to go deeper into it now. But go watch that video. I did it, and it's on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network. Click on videos, because I went deep into it. All right. Let's see. Let's continue here. Okay, so Redoshi said, quote, "I was 12 years old, and he was a man from another tribe who had a family in Africa." Okay, and Redoshi was quoted as, she said this to Amelia Boynton Robinson, quote, "I couldn't understand his talk, and he couldn't understand me. They put us on a block, an auction block, together, and sold us for man and wife," end quote. Now, this began Redoshi's life as a slave on a plantation in Bogue Chitto, Chitto, I guess it's pronounced, Bogue Chitto, Alabama. 5 years after she arrived in the United States, she became a free woman with the ratification of the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. That was December 6, 1865, and it was adopted December 18th, 1865. Now, according to an article published in the Montgomery Advertiser, after Redoshi was freed, she remained on the plantation with the Smiths, the former slave owners, which was common for emancipated people. And when you really study the history of slavery, and people can start with this book here, Before the Mayflower, by Lerone Bennett Jr., Before the Mayflower, okay? A History of Black America. Because they were not compensated largely with tools, with money, with land, you're going to have some former slaves who stay on the plantation. They're offered plots of land, they're offered to work the land, become sharecroppers. If you haven't been off the plantation before, you don't know how to read, you don't know how to take care of yourself, you're not compensated with anything, So you're gonna have some that stay on the plantation and say, okay, we'll work here because you know, especially if you have a slave master that's like halfway decent as far as slave masters go. Now, if you had a brutal slave master, that's different. Okay, I mean, you're gone before they can even finish the sentence, let you know you're free. But if you got a halfway decent slave master, right? We got one that's halfway decent. You say, well, we take our chances here because we don't know what's out there. We haven't been out there before. Okay. She said, Redoshi said, quote, we stay on Smith Place, the plantation. We stay on Smith Place where we know folks be good to us. She said in the 1932 interview, when Washington Smith died, the former slave owner, she said, quote, we stay with Mistress Smith, the wife of the former slave master. And she added, quote, we love her and no want to leave, N-O. We love her and no want to leave, end quote. Okay. I'm trying to tell you, when you study the slave narratives, you have cases like this. If you had a slave master, former slave master that was halfway decent, you can believe what you want to believe. You actually study the history. You had some that chose to stay on a plantation because they weren't equipped to survive on their own in many instances. Okay. So this happened. Now in this case, they were able to save up money and buy land. Okay. You're going to have some that are going to be exploited by the sharecropping system. You're going to have some that are able to survive and do all right with the sharecropping system, but you're going to have some that are exploited. They become indebted. Okay. And their labor continues to be exploited. You're going to have some who are going to leave this. You're going to have some who are going to be able to make it as a sharecropper, but they're going to leave the South during the Great Migration, 1915 to 1970. You're going to have some who are sharecroppers, who are going to be able to make some money, who are going to end up buying land as well. They start out as a sharecropper. They're going to end up buying their own land and stop being a sharecropper. They're going to buy farms as well. So you're going to have these different things that take place. About 1930, we owned about 920,000 farms. And from 1930 to 1939, we lose over 200,000 farms because of the Great Depression. We can't keep up the mortgage on the farms. We can't, pay the mortgage on the farms, things like this, pay the expenses. So the Great Depression was detrimental to us. We lost millions of acres of land. And then we know from 1920 to 1975, we lost 14 million acres of land. Okay. Go look at the broadcast I did dealing with the black farmers who are suing a soybean company, SOY, because they are claiming that they were sold fake soybeans in a plot to steal their land. And there's a history of different ways that our land was stolen from us, whether we were driven off of our land by the Ku Klux Klan or the Black Legion, things like this, or whether we were just killed for our land and our land was taken over. There were different ways that our land was taken over as well, or whether it was a situation where you had an African-American man who was a farmer and he registered to vote. Mississippi, Alabama, okay, like in the 1950s, 1960s, he registered to vote and the loan on his bank was called in. I'm sorry, the loan on his farm was called in by the bank. He can't come up with the money, so they take his farm. This is one of the things the White Citizens Council did. When you study the White Citizens Council that started in Mississippi in 1954, okay? The White Citizens Council was founded as a direct backlash to the Brown versus Board of Education desegregation case. They were founded in Mississippi and they spread all throughout the South, the White Citizens Council. Their actual name was the Citizens Council, but they were known as the White Citizens Council because there was only white people that were allowed to join. Okay. All right. So this history is deep and nuanced. And you have to really study the history to understand it. It's a deep, nuanced history. It's not just one way. This is why I tell people the Willie Lynch letter 1712 is a fraud. Willie Lynch never historically existed. Most of us don't even understand the difference between real history and fake history. Willie Lynch never historically existed. Take the Willie Lynch letter, throw it in the garbage can. So Dr. Durkin deduced from the memoir from Amelia Boynton Robinson, Amelia Boynton dies in 2015, that while Redoshi stayed on the plantation for the remainder of her life, she later owned land in Bogue Chitto, okay, Alabama. So this was the ultimate goal, okay? This was the ultimate goal, to own land. So even if they stayed as a sharecropper, the goal wasn't to be a sharecropper for the rest of their life. Most of them, they want to make enough money so that they could own their own land, have their own farm, okay? Because they knew that land was key to survival. You're still dealing with the agricultural age. If you read the article from blackpast.org dealing with 40 Acres and a Mule, Special Field Order number 15. And I think I printed that article up here. Okay. So I had it with me the other night. Let me see here. How's everybody doing? And share this broadcast on your Facebook page. Invite your friends to tune in also. If you like this type of information, you can donate to the African History Network as well. PayPal.me/the AHN Show. PayPal.me/the AHN Show, or at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Click on the yellow donate button. And that helps us to keep doing the research, pay for the ink cartridges, pay for all this paper that I use, pay to get things printed up, like this study here that I had to get printed up. And it helps finance the research and finance the African History Network show as well. Hold on, let me see something. We read the article. We'll post the link from blackpast.org dealing with 40 Acres and a Mule, Special Field Order number 15, okay? Because that came about from a meeting with a number of African-American leaders, okay? And they were asked, what was it that the slaves needed most, okay? I'm paraphrasing. What was it the slaves needed most? And they said they needed land. This is in right about 1865, okay, that this meeting took place. Let's see. So yeah, January 16th, 1865, General William T. Sherman issued Special Field Order number 15. And there was an article that Gates wrote for theroot.com. Okay, here it is here. There's an article that Gates wrote for theroot.com, and it's on PBS website, pbs.org. So we know Reconstruction, the 4-part series aired on PBS from Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. And you've heard me in the past talk about Gates. You've heard me be critical of Gates, but also I give Gates his props. He does write some good articles. I've read dozens of his articles. And also this is his book here, The African Americans, Many Rivers to Cross. Now, many of us have seen the 6-part series that came out in 2012 on PBS, and they have some of it on YouTube. Don't tell PBS that. But this is his book that's a companion to that 6-part series, The African Americans, Many Rivers to Cross. So, I don't just read, Dr. David Imhotep, who wrote The First Americans or Africans Documented Evidence, or Collective Courage by Dr. Jessica Gordon Nimhard. I don't just read Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, Golden Age of the Moor, right? I don't just read Runoko Rashidi. Okay, where's Runoko's book? One of his books. I just saw it. Yeah. Runoko Rashidi, dealing with Black Star, the African presence in early Europe, and dealing with the history of the Moors in Europe. Okay, I don't just read Dr. Pero Dagbovi's book dealing with Dr. Carter G. Woodson, because there are not a lot of books about Dr. Woodson. Okay, but I also read Dr. Gates as well. I read his stuff also. The African Americans, many rivers to cross. Okay, so let's continue. And this is now Contributions to Civilization, Tony Browder, one of the best books you're gonna read right here. Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization by Tony Browder. Oh man, that's a hell of a book. Okay, and then for those who are talking about reparations, you have to read this article here from theatlantic.com, 2014, June 2014 cover story by Ta-Nehisi Coates, The Case for Reparations. This is about a 17-page article. I bought the I bought the actual magazine. It's online, but I bought the actual magazine when it came out. Okay, if we look quickly here at this article from Gates, The Truth Behind 40 Acres and a Mule, African American History Blog, The Truth Behind 40 Acres and a Mule. He deals with how there was a meeting that took place with African American ministers at the time, African American leaders, okay? Because these were leaders at the time. And you still have some African American ministers today that are leaders as well. Let's see. Okay. So what happened was, we've been taught, Gates says, we've been taught in school that the source of the policy of 40 acres and a mule was Union General William T. Sherman's Special Field Order number 15, issued January 16, 1865. That account is half right. William T. Sherman prescribed the 40 acres in that order, but not the mule, okay? The mule is going to come later, and they were going to loan the mule to the former slaves for a period of about 6 months. But what many accounts leave out is that this idea for massive land redistribution actually was the result of a discussion that General William T. Sherman and Secretary of War Edward M. Stanton had 4 days before Sherman issued Special Field Order number 15. They had this meeting with 20 leaders of the African American community in Savannah, Georgia, where William T. Sherman was headquartered following his famous March to the Sea. The meeting was unprecedented in American history. Today, we commonly use the phrase 40 acres and a mule, but few of us have read the Special Field Order itself. 3 of its parts are relevant here. Okay, you can read all this yourself. Section 1 bears repeating in full, quote, the islands from Charleston south and abandoned rice fields along the rivers for 30 miles back from the sea and the country bordering St. Johns River, Florida, are reserved and set apart for the settlement of the Negroes, now made free by the acts of war and the proclamation of the President of the United States. Section 2 specifies that these new communities, moreover, would be governed entirely by Black people themselves. Section 2 specifies that these new communities would be governed entirely by Black people themselves. On the islands and in the settlements hereafter to be established, no white person whatsoever, unless military officers and soldiers detailed for duty, will be permitted to reside, and the sole, S-O-L-E, and the sole and exclusive management of affairs will be left to the freed people themselves, okay? So this was creating, if you will, a nation within a nation. By the laws of war and orders of the President of the United States, the Negro is free and must be dealt with as such. Finally, Section 3 specifies the allocation of land. Each family shall have a plot of not more than 40 acres of tillable ground, and when it borders on some water channel with not more than 800 feet waterfront, in the possession of which land the military authorities will afford them protection until such time as they can protect themselves, or until Congress shall regulate the title, okay? So with this order, 400,000 acres of land There's only 400,000 acres. 400,000 acres of land, quote, a strip of coastline stretching from Charleston, South Carolina, to the St. Johns River in Florida, including Georgia's Sea Islands and the mainland 30 miles in from the coast, end quote, okay, would be redistributed to the newly freed slaves. The extent of this order and its larger implications are mind-boggling, all right? But this came out of a meeting that they had with that General William T. Sherman and Secretary of War Edward Stanton had with 20 African-American owners, okay? African-American leaders, okay? Let me skip down here. Stanton has suggested to Sherman that they gather, quote, the leaders of the local Negro community, end quote, and ask them something no one else had apparently thought to ask, quote, what do you want for your own people, end quote, following the war? And what they wanted astonishes us even today, okay? And they said they wanted land. They said they wanted land. Okay, all right. So read this article here. The truth about, because there's a lot more to it. I just don't have time to get through it. It's like 4 pages. The truth behind 40 Acres and a Mule, okay? And this is by Dr. Gates. It originally appeared on the root.com, the truth about 40 Acres and a Mule. Okay, this gives background history because most of us talk about 40 Acres and a Mule, don't understand it. This is why I'm telling people, look, we have to make legal arguments for reparations. Most of these arguments are not legal arguments. And then read this one also from blackpast.org, 40 Acres and a Mule as well, blackpast.org. Okay. All right. So let's continue dealing with Redoshi. But all this is interconnected, interrelated. Okay. All this is interconnected, interrelated, and you have to understand history. And these are examples of how history is in the headlines today. This is an example of how history is in the headlines today. Was the debate over reparations, Confederate monuments, okay? Whether it's the debate over the abolishing the Electoral College, which was created by the Constitution in 1787 and gave an unfair advantage to the Southern slaveholding states. Okay, whether it's about the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, which Republicans want to revise, all of that. All this deals with history. Okay, so according to Amelia Boynton, around 6,000 acres in Bogue Chitto, Alabama, was owned and operated by African Americans. Okay, these were former slaves. The land was inherited from formerly enslaved people who acquired it soon after slavery was abolished. Okay, and Redoshi is going to go on to own land. Let's see. Now, Redoshi's life can provide a deeper understanding of the challenges and the narrow but previously unthinkable opportunities facing people as they emerged from slavery in the United States. Now, Sylvian Diop, if you've heard me talk about Sylvian Diop, this sister is a visiting professor at Brown University's Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice. And she is a historian of the African diaspora. She wrote a book called Fighting the Slave Trade, Fighting the Slave Trade. And this documents the tactics that Africans used to fight against the transatlantic slave trade, especially in West Africa, okay? But she's quoted here in this article. She said, we may still discover people who passed away after Redoshi. She may very well not be the last, which is of no importance whatsoever. What is crucial is the people's stories. What is crucial is the people's story. And this is why when you read this study here, Teaching Hard History of American Slavery from the Southern Poverty Law Center, they talk about how it is extremely important to read the slave narratives, because this gives you a firsthand account about slavery, what it was like, etc. Okay, download this from splcenter.org, Southern Poverty Law Center, splcenter.org, and search for Teaching Hard History, American Slavery, Teaching Hard History, American Slavery, okay? So Redoshi and other enslaved people later came to own around 6,000 acres of land on the plantation, where she spent the rest of her life. Okay, so they ended up owning land on that plantation, but they were lucky. They had some halfway decent white folks. Apparently, they had some. It is what it is. You had cases like that. It is what it is. When you actually read the slave narratives, you find that out. Let's see. Hold on. The only other document. Okay, now, so I'm looking at the article from history.com, official website of the History Channel. Forced marriage as a 12-year-old girl, the life of America's last slave ship survivor. And it goes on to say, the only other documents we have of African women's experiences of the transatlantic slave trade are fleeting allusions that were typically recorded by slave owners. So it is incredible to be able to tell Redoshi's life story, said Dr. Hannah Durkin. Okay. Rarely do we get to hear the story of an individual woman, let alone see her as well. Okay. Okay, so let's go to some of your comments here. How's everybody doing? African American business owners, post the name of your business here on the thread of the broadcast, and we'll let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network as well. Email us at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com, customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. We take your 30-second and 60-second audio commercial, put into the audio podcast of our shows, the African History Network show that we do Sunday night. We've been doing that show 9 years. And some of the broadcasts we do throughout the week. We're on 8 different podcast platforms. We're on iTunes, Stitcher, Castbox, Acast, Blog Talk Radio, FM Player. We get each episode gets thousands of listens across the country and outside of the country as well. Okay. And African American business owners, post the name of your business here on the thread of the broadcast. And we have some other ways we can help you get new customers as well. Okay, Chris, how you doing, Chris? Juanita, I see that not more. I see that not more than 40 loophole. They could have been given 5 and cheated. Okay, we got John. Juanita, are these records of ships bringing slaves into the U.S. after the law was passed? Are there records? Yeah, there are records of some of those ships, because some of those men were prosecuted and convicted. If so, how many, and how would legal issues come of it if there are no records? That's something that the commission, the HR 40 commission, and the commission that Senator Cory Booker wants to have in the U.S. Senate, those are things that they would investigate. This is what congressional commissions investigate. This is one of the things they do, and they get the evidence. This is one of the things they do. Now, groups like NCOBRA may have evidence, et cetera. They can provide that. But those committees, they do their own investigations, which is extremely important, because it's going to be the House of Representatives that has to vote on this. And when they lay out their argument to vote on, they're not going to say, go read this book. They're going to say, go read this study. They'll say, read this congressional study. Same thing in the U.S. Senate. This is what I'm trying to explain to people. You understand how many white people have to vote on this before it goes to the president's desk? We don't understand the real process of this. We don't understand that real process. Okay. All right, now speaking of reparations, the 30th annual National NCOBRA Convention 2019 is coming up in Detroit. 30th annual. They ain't just start talking about reparations. This is the 30th annual reparations conference. 400 years of terror, a debt still owed. This is taking place in Detroit at Timbuktu Academy of Science and Technology, located at 10800 East Canfield Street in Detroit. 10800 East Canfield Street in Detroit. Save the date, Thursday, June 20th, 2019 through Sunday, June 23rd, 2019. For more information, visit their website in cobraonline.org. In the letter N, Cobra, C-O-B-R-A, in cobraonline.org, or call 202-643-1460. That's the national contact number. 202-643-1460. Local contact number is 313-399-8797. 313-399-8797. I'll be there as well. This is in Detroit, Thursday, June 20th through Sunday, June 23rd, 2019. So if you want to learn about reparations, learn about the history of the reparations movement, you got to study people like Queen Mother Moore, Reparations Ray Jenkins. You got to study groups like in Cobra, okay? People like Dr. Ron Daniels, who's been involved in the reparations fight for 50 years. Okay, so when you jump into a movement, I know that people who just got into the reparations movement, welcome to the resistance. We're happy to have you, but when you jump into a movement, you have to understand the history of that movement, okay? All right, Senator Cory Booker. Yeah, I talked about Senator Cory Booker on Sunday's show, okay? Because Republicans in the Senate are giving opposition to Senator Cory Booker's bill, and I talked about that. Okay. Okay, we have our Juanita as well. All right. And then be sure to visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Also, all my DVD lectures are there. We have an online course that's on demand. It's a 14-hour, 7-session online course that I teach called Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Ancient Egypt, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. This is a 14-hour, 7-session online course. So I deal with thousands of years of history. I deal with the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors, and how the Moors take the teachings from ancient Egypt into Europe. This is what they talk about here in this book, Golden Age of the Moor. It was the Africans known as the Moors that take the teachings from ancient Egypt, ancient Kemet, into Europe and bring Europe out of the Dark Ages. This saves Europe, and this leads to the transatlantic slave trade happening. Okay, so we posted that link there as well. The courses are all on demand. It's a 10-course online bundle pack. It also includes Great African Women in History, the Mothers of Civilization, and some other ones as well. So you click on that link. So you can watch from around the world. As soon as you register, you can start watching. It's on sale $40, regularly $130. And it's also at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, on the homepage as well, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Okay, let's go to some more of your comments here. And that all helps support the African History Network. Helps us keep doing the research, pay the bills, finance the show, etc. This is a lot of work. Let's see here. Okay, Michelle, how you doing, Michelle Williams? If you have any more questions, go ahead and post your comments here. We'll get a couple more in before I have to get out of here. We have Barbara. Okay, yeah, so when we look at Redoshi, you know, this is important why the research, this is one of the reasons why the research is so important, because we thought that Cudjo Lewis was the last survivor, but we find out there was one who outlived Cudjo Lewis. And this, I mean, when you look at Cudjo Lewis dies in 1935, he came directly from Africa. He came directly from Dahomey. When you look at Redoshi, directly from Dahomey. This is less than 100 years ago, okay? And Africa Town is still there, even though it's having problems, people trying to take their land. It's still there in Alabama as well. So this history connects us to our ancestors. This history connects us to African people. We are African people, even though some people have been taught to hate Africa and don't want to acknowledge it. No, we still are African people. We never stopped being African people. Some of us have forgotten it and prefer the term black, and black doesn't connect you to land, doesn't connect you to ancestry. Black comes from the Old English word black, which means to bleach or to make white, but we don't study the etymology of words, so we don't understand this. All right, let's see here. Who else we have here? Okay. Domika, Chris. Okay, so everybody follow us on our YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP, and follow us here on Facebook, the African History Network on Facebook. Turn on the notifications so you know when we go live, and also on our YouTube channel, when you subscribe, click on the bell. You'll be notified when we go live, when we upload new videos as well. Okay. Hopefully you learned something from this broadcast here. You can share this with your friends and family, share this with your children. And you can donate to the African History Network, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show, or you can send it through PayPal to the AHN show at gmail.com, the AHN show at gmail.com also, okay? And you can also set up for a recurring donation if you like. If you want to donate 10, 15, 25, 50, $100, it all helps. You can also go to our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, click on the yellow donate button right on the home page as well, okay? All right. And then be sure to post the name of your business here on the thread of the broadcast. African American business owners will let you know how you can advertise with this also. And if you send it through PayPal through the email address, the ahnshow@gmail.com, choose the friends and family option. That way PayPal doesn't take their cut out. Okay, that helps too. All right, so look, hey, we have to get out of here. And a lot of people looking at my shirt. This is honoring African American women. What does it say here? Black female legends. You know, they have everybody from Michelle Obama on here to Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, who wrote the ISIS papers. You got Dr. Wilson on here. This was a gift from Herb Alchemist. You see a broadcast here on my fan page. This is a gift that Brittany gave me for my birthday. You see Harriet Tubman here in the middle, right? Angela Davis. This is Ella Baker, very much underrated. Ella Baker helped to found SNCC. Ella Baker was the co-founder of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, along with Dr. King in 1957. Ella Baker co-founded SNCC April of 1960. SNCC comes out of Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Okay, so Ella Baker was a significant, she's underrated. She's not talked about a lot. We'll talk about Rosa Parks, and we should. But we also need to talk about Ella Baker. Okay, guys, hey, we have to get out of here. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's corrects wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. Right now, it's corrects wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. Talk to you next time. Peace.